Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Community Webinar. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Abby Abel, and I will be facilitating along with my colleague Emma Harrison, and the webinar will be recorded. Before we dive in, let me turn it over to Francisco Picado, who will provide Spanish interpretation services this evening. Francisco.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francisco Picado. I'm from Language Access LLC, and as part of the efforts of the City and County of Denver to reach as broad a segment of the population as possible, interpretation is offered in many events like this. To take advantage of this service, all you have to do is click on the interpretation globe that will appear in a minute and select the language of your choice. Buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Francisco Picado y yo represento a Language Access como parte de los esfuerzos de la ciudad por comunicarse con el segmento más amplio posible de la población de la ciudad. Se ofrecen servicios de interpretación. Para poder aprovechar este servicio, todo lo que tiene que hacer es pulsar el globito en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla y seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. Thank you, Abby.
Great. Thank you, Francisco. Appreciate that. We'll just give everyone a moment to move into your respective rooms if you are needing Spanish interpretation. Great. So many of us connected in this format in November of last year, and then again in February of this year at the community open house at Carla Madison Rec Center. And since then, the project has wrapped up final design and is further shifting its focus to construction. So we'll take the opportunity tonight to talk through what the team has accomplished in the last couple of months and where the project is headed. So a couple of ground rules here. While all participants will be muted throughout the presentation, we encourage you to submit any questions through the Q&A function here at the bottom. You're also able to sort of add a thumbs up or a thumbs down to questions, which will help us direct the facilitation at the end. We ask that your questions be constructive and respectful, and we will address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation portion of the webinar. For any questions that we don't get to, we encourage you to submit them through the web form on the website, which is listed here. So with that covered, let me begin by recognizing a few of the key partners in this project, many of whom are in attendance this evening. And if we move to the next slide, you can see some of them. They are the City and County of Denver, the Regional Transportation District, RTD, the City of Aurora, our Denver Regional Council of Governments, the Colorado Department of Transportation, Federal Transit Administration, our business improvement and cultural districts, our equity and accessibility partners, our city council members, and many more. So thank you for attending tonight for those who have. Our agenda for this evening is to do quite a few things, so hoping that many of you can stay for the full presentation. First is to give you a project overview. Again, as I mentioned, there's a lot that's occurred since the last time that we connected. We want to share an update on 100% design, talk about the curb area management plan and where that stands, as well as the parallel streets safety study. We'll review the current construction plan and update, as well as small business outreach. And as I mentioned before, take the remaining time to answer any questions that you may have. To take us through these topics, we have a great team assembled this evening, and I'll just take a moment to introduce them, and you'll be hearing from them momentarily. So first and foremost is John Stewart, who's the project director for this project from Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. James Moore, who is the design lead on the project. Nick Vanderkwak and Charlie Alexander have been leading a lot of the transportation components of this project, particularly the CAMP, the Curbside Area Management Plan, and the Parallel Street Safety Study. Marcy Lochran will be taking us through the construction communications and the plan. And Ryan Lewis really leads small business outreach and will be taking us through some of that in conjunction with Joanne Greek, who joins us from Denver's Economic Development and Opportunity Group. And so we look forward to hearing from this team this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to John Stewart to take us through the project overview. So John.
All right, thank you, Abby. And everybody, thank you for joining us for this webinar. Yeah, let's get right into the project overview. First, I kind of want to just reiterate why we're doing the project and what the project is, just give a brief recap. The vision for this project is to move people more efficiently, safely, and sustainably along East Colfax Avenue. And that highlights three priorities that we've heard from the public, the citizens of Denver over and over, and that is to provide more transportation options, to increase the safety of the transportation network, and to provide more sustainability or environmental resilience to the transportation network as well. And this project, we believe, hits all three of those goals with the Bus Rapid Transit project. Next slide, please. So this map here gives an overview of the length of the project. There are three distinct phases of East Colfax BRT. The yellow, the blue, and the orange. In the yellow area, that's the downtown segment. That will be a side running bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes. Those are existing today. So the Colfax BRT will be using those existing lines. The only changes that will be occurring as part of this project is we'll be adding the branding associated with Colfax BRT to this segment. The next part of the project is the blue area from Broadway to Yosemite and Denver. This is where the project goes to a center running with bus only lanes in the Colfax proper. And so this is really the main part of the project where it goes from a regular bus line to dedicated bus lines in the center of the roadway. And then in the orange segment on the right, this is within the city of Aurora. And at that point, it'll go back to side running. It will be in mixed flow traffic at that point. So there will not be bus only dedicated lanes in that segment of the project. And it'll look very similar to how it does today, with bus stops on the side of the roadway along the sidewalk. Next slide, please. So here's a reminder of what center running bus rapid transit looks like. With the implementation of Colfax BRT, we'll be having two center running bus only lanes with one lane of traffic on each side for general purpose vehicles. And at the intersections, there will be turn lanes so that cars can turn left at these areas. And each bus stop is going to have two platforms. So if you look on the left, that would be going towards the east, towards Aurora. So the people going eastbound would get off and on at the station on the left. And if you were headed downtown towards Denver, you would get on and off on the station on the right. So each stop has a pair of stations in that blue segment in the center running portion of the project. So this promotes less conflict between the buses and cars. So that allows buses to move more quickly. The left turns at signalized intersections promotes safety because we do currently have a lot of conflicts between left turning vehicles and bikes and pedestrians. And this also shows the center running bus lanes with the station platforms. So let's go to the next slide. So where are we in the project? Like Abby said earlier, we have just completed 100% design. That has happened this month. So we'll be sharing those design plans with you. Earlier in the year, we put our request for FTA funding, and that occurred in the spring. Also, we finished our environmental review for the project. That also happened in the spring. And back earlier in the year, we finished up our 90% design. I think that's when we had our last touch point with the community, is to share the 90% design plans. And so where we're at now is we're basically have everything turned into FTA. We have our design complete, and we're waiting to get official notification from FTA of our final award amount. And with that anticipated timing happening this summer, we expect to go to council with a construction contract with our contractor, our general contractor, who is Kramer North America. We expect that to happen in August. Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about where we're headed. So if you look on the left, we're finishing up the final design process right now. We did finish up 100% design this month. We're waiting to hear essentially from FTA to get the final go-ahead. We expect going to council next month for the construction contract. And once that process is complete, then we will issue a notice to proceed to the contractor. We expect that to happen towards the end of September. And then with a construction start in October, along with a groundbreaking ceremony to occur in October as well. And so we expect to start construction this fall, and the construction is going to take just about 3 years. We expect construction to go until the end of 2027. And that is, we're basically waiting to get written confirmation from FTA on our approval and thumbs up, and then we'll be going to construction this fall.
Great. John, thank you for the project overview, and we'll shift it over to James to talk about design, which includes, to respond to one of the questions briefly in chat, really the stations, the streetscaping, and the branding elements. And James will talk us through where we are with all of those pieces. So go ahead, James.
Great, thanks, Abby. So if we can go to the next slide here. To start, I'll give a recap of key BRT features for those of you who maybe weren't attending the previous webinar. So dedicated bus lanes, as John mentioned, those will exist in the center running portion in Denver. Specialized vehicles, RTD will be procuring a new fleet of 60-foot articulated buses. They'll have 3 doors versus the 2 doors they have now. They'll have transit signal priority equipment on board, and will allow for bikes to be loaded at the rear door versus on the front of the bus, like you see today. What else? Enhanced stations, so near level boarding, which provides a rail-like experience, off-board fare collection, digital passenger information displays, and then of course all the BRT branding treatments that go along with the new stations. Great. 100% design advances. So the 100% milestone, it's an exciting one for the design team. As you can expect, design advances from 90 to 100% were not significant, and primarily involved wrapping up some of the more detailed elements on the project, many of which are related to utility and drainage and structural items below the road. So we remain focused on the project goals that you see here on this slide as we progress toward the 100% design level goal. Safety, accessibility, and comfort all informed our design decisions, and many of the design elements on the project check 2 or more of these boxes. Next slide. So this kind of illustrates some of these project goals that occur at the station. Outside the station, you know, we're proposing 6 signalized ped crossings. You know, that falls under the safety category. As John mentioned, in the center running segment, all left turns from Colfax are protected at signalized intersections. Again, eliminating points of conflict, and that that greatly increases the safety of both vehicles and pedestrians. You can see here, we've got secondary egress point provided at center platforms, as well as emergency telephones. When it comes to accessibility, the stations, all the elements on the station meet or most often exceed ADA minimum requirements. We've got, hard to see here, but we've got 8-foot wide curb ramps that run north-south to the center platforms. Those exceed the minimum requirements of 5 in the city and county of Denver. We've got gentle slope walkways from the crosswalk there up to the platform. Again, it's not a ramp. It's not steep enough to be considered a ramp. It's a flat slope. And that also checks the comfort box. So comfort, we've got sidewalk widening, as you can see there. Bulb outs generally focused at the station locations, though they do exist elsewhere between stations. Through coordination with the business improvement districts, the 100% design now actually shows a widened sidewalk in front of the Ogden Theater. Also maintains the current street level buffer that exists today at the Bluebird Theater. Both of those maintain the safety and comfort of folks attending those venues. So a lot of work put into sidewalk widening at the appropriate locations and improving the experience for everyone using the corridor. And then along those lines, new trees along the corridor, which will, as the years go by, provide a nice tree canopy. We are using what's known as a soil cell system, which allows the tree to thrive, the roots to thrive, but still allowing for a decent width of usable sidewalk width. And then I think we've got a couple slides showing some street level perspectives of the platforms. You can see the ticketing equipment I mentioned earlier, the passenger information display, which is that large sort of portrait mode monitor there, all the signage involved. You can see the bus for some perspective there with the bus branding. And then you can also see the glass canopies, which I think we're going to discuss next. I think Abby, you're going to handle that.
Yep.
Part of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate that, James. And I think you can also see some of the light branding on the stations and the buses too, as we sort of move through some of these renderings. More exciting news to share is around that public art piece. And so a little setup here before we share the news. So as a reminder, 1% of any capital improvement project over $1 million that is undertaken by the city must be set aside for the arts. So just as a reminder there. So earlier this year, Denver Arts and Venues, in partnership with a community-based art selection panel, invited artists to apply for the opportunity to create art for the East Colfax BRT project, in particular for the stations. And for these sort of the glass pieces that are embedded in the canopy that's outlined here. 5 artists were selected and have been commissioned to each create 3 unique glass designs for 3 station canopies in the Denver portion of the corridor. And we are excited to share these 90% designs with all of you tonight, which hopefully you can tell are really intended to capture the feeling of Colfax and are for, again, the first 5 stations. So once these designs are complete, the artist will begin work on the next set of 5 stations. And I have to say that I can't help but note that 4 of the 5 selected artists are from Denver. So pretty exciting. And you can see the artist names right there under each one of their designs. So with that, hopefully what feels like exciting news, I'll turn it over to Nick Vanderkwak to talk about where we are with the Curbside Area Management Plan, or CAMP.
Great.
Nick?
Thank you, Abby. Those are exciting. I haven't seen those. Those look great. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Curbside Area Management Plan and give you an update as to what we've put together as part of this planning process and how that's come together. So if you're going to go to the next slide there. A little background on what this is previously we called it a Curbside Access Plan, a CAP, just to avoid confusion. Those are the same things. It's just called the Curbside Area Management Plan now. The purpose of these plans, Dottie does these in neighborhoods all over the city and county. They're intended to develop and comprehensively address changing conditions in an area, which could include density, redevelopment, reduction in parking supply, and a lot of different things. And a lot of these things, have already happened in many of the neighborhoods in surrounding Colfax. And with Colfax BRT, there's a lot more change happening. And so it's important to understand the effect that all that change has on the surrounding area and streets, and what we can do to anticipate and plan for parking and other curbside uses in those areas. In the process, we acknowledge that a lot of people use the streets, a lot of people use the curb in different ways, and just understanding the needs of all those groups, residents, businesses, visitors, all sorts of people that are involved in that. We want to make sure that we're accounting for that in what's unveiled here. And through this process, we're explored different curbside management strategies and put together a series of recommendations that I'm going to share with you here in a little bit, and proposing regulations that address not only what's happening currently, which we've studied in tons of detail by understanding parking utilization on all the blocks on Colfax and surrounding Colfax, but also what may happen in the future and what's going to happen with the implementation and the changes that are happening with Colfax BRT. Next slide, please. So with the process, really it's just to kind of describe what we've done. We studied parking on Colfax for the entire length of Colfax BRT and quickly recognized that some of the bigger changes to parking and some of the more densely parked areas in Colfax, on Colfax, are on the further western areas, specifically between Broadway and Colorado Boulevard. And so we studied Colfax the entire length, and then we started on this process, developing this plan, really to look at the surrounding neighborhood streets and looking at what is the parking utilization on those streets, what are the existing regulations, and what should we change to make those function better for all the users that will want to use that curb space. So through that process, we met with a stakeholder group. We had 3 meetings oriented around this process early on last year and this year. We had 2 rounds of online engagement. Many of the folks on this call likely participated in that, where we gathered some of the feedback shown on the map below here. All those points are some of the points we received with feedback. So we had a round where we incorporated some changes, and then we had another round where we had some more detail developed. More than 175 comments were analyzed and looked at as part of the process, in addition to the data process that we went through to develop this. And this all turned into one curbside area management plan, which incorporated updates for loading zones and timed parking restrictions on blocks, and the other elements of the plan, including some of the paid parking on Colfax. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some of the key changes or key recommendations that came out of this effort, and then we'll kind of talk through those. The first one here is looking at paid parking. So a lot of Colfax already has metered parking. When you look to the area east of or west of Elizabeth Street, that area of Colfax where there is parking, it is metered parking currently. There are a lot of changes and reductions of parking on Colfax with the BRT, so there will be less metered parking in those spaces. So as part of this effort, the recommendations here, you'll see the green dots, many of them on the side streets in the area immediately adjacent to Colfax. We went through block by block and recommended where you could add some additional metered parking to provide a space for the commercial activity that needs parking, and people want to park there for those uses, providing spots that turn over frequently. So there are spaces available, and paid parking is a way to do that with metered. So we have more metered parking, and it's adjacent to the commercial parcels. There's none that will be adjacent to residential parcels or land uses along the corridor. And then also on Colfax, on the other side of Elizabeth, as we go towards Colorado, we are introducing the parking that's on Colfax will also be metered parking, and recognizing that many of those spaces were highly utilized, and making that paid makes it more available for people that need to use it There will also be choices for other places to park if people don't want to utilize those spaces. Next slide, please. The next key recommendation is looking at what do we do with loading zones, shorter time parking. One goal of these planning efforts is to simplify, and rather than having some minor differences between some of the recommendations, making that very clear so it's predictable and people can expect, they know what things mean when they see a parking sign on the street. And so the loading zone, short-term loading zone that's part of this plan is the pink dot shown on the map here. And those are limited to 15 minutes of short-term parking or loading that could be used for Uber and Lyft drop-offs, also for commercial loading for bars and businesses and other things on Colfax. Those are mostly oriented on the side streets, primarily that first spot in from Colfax, where a truck or other vehicle that's loading can easily pull in and out. And so we've looked at all the land uses on Colfax and identified where the existing loading zones are, and then added some new ones where they make sense to serve the needs of the businesses along Colfax. Next slide. Another big change here is standardizing and changing some of the time limits that are established on many of the side streets on Colfax. And so we've standardized them to 2-hour parking from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 3-hour parking from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Both of those kind of serve different needs of the different land uses that are adjacent to on Colfax and adjacent to Colfax. So you see a mix of the blue and the purple. The blue is the 2-hour, which ends at 6, and the purple is the 3-hour, which ends at 10, which allows people to park there a little bit longer and into the evening, but doesn't allow people to park for more than that. So it allows enough time for people to, dine a little bit longer and do business on Colfax and experience Colfax and park their car in those locations. Part of that process was incorporating current streets that already had time restrictions, and some of that was some streets that don't currently have time restrictions. We're recommending those be put in place to provide enough parking for folks to use that, but not park there indefinitely. These time restrictions, there is ability for residents to get a resident parking permit, and it exempts them from those time restrictions. So they can park there for as long as they want, but others that are visiting will be subject to these time restrictions. Next slide, please. And so the last one here that I want to talk about, the time limits that are introduced on many of the streets. We still are keeping some unrestricted parking. The streets shown in yellow here will remain available for anyone to park on. They won't have the need for the residents to have a residential parking permit. Anyone can park there. This was based mainly off of low occupancy rates and also being further away from Colfax. And then also the avenues, the east-west streets. Those generally are remaining unrestricted to allow a place for people to park that need to be parking their vehicles for longer than 2 or 3 hours, that theoretically could be workers at businesses on Colfax and things like that, people that need to find those parking spaces. Next slide. So all of these recommendations and the plan, I will say, will be available very shortly. We had intended for those to be online. Dottie has a website where they keep all of their curbside area management plans. That will be up there likely tomorrow or soon after that this week. This link will take you there. You can review and look at everything I've presented on there. And if you have any specific questions, we ask that you please email parking.operations@denvergov.org with Colfax Camp in the subject line, and someone will respond to any of your questions or any concerns that you want addressed. And we really thank you for all the participation that you've given into this process to get us to where we are here.
Great, appreciate that, Nick. And we're gonna just hand it over to Charlie to talk a little bit about the parallel street safety analysis.
Great, thank you, Abby. So we've been hard at work over the course of 2024 on our study of the streets parallel to Colfax Avenue, specifically 13th, 14th, 16th, and 17th Avenues. So I want to start out by mentioning that we have analyzed a lot of data in developing recommendations for these streets. I'll speak first to crash and traffic data, and then to input that we've gotten from members of the community on these streets. We studied 5 years of crash data. There's the 5 years most recently available to us, and you can see the numbers here that a lot of crashes have occurred on these corridors. The 539 resulting in a fatality or injury, I do want to mention, includes injury of any level. So everything from complaint of pain all the way up to a severe injury. But obviously those numbers are not consistent with what the city wants to see, and with its Vision Zero goal of eliminating fatalities and serious injuries on the system. These corridors tend to experience more crashes than you would expect on similar corridors. Obviously, the goal is zero fatalities and serious injuries. But when we just look at all crashes and whether or not these corridors are above average or are below average, there are many locations on these corridors that are above average, that have more crashes than we would have expected. And then from a speed standpoint, no matter which way you look at it, speeds are high on these corridors. We've identified some of the statistics here that relate to the speeds that many people are traveling, but the data generally reinforces what we've heard from members of the community, that it's not just the average or statistical measures of speed, but just the number of people going over the speed limit, or the number of people going at very, very fast speeds on these corridors. Next slide. We also did a lot of work to supplement that crash and traffic data with public input, and many thanks to everyone here tonight and others who participated in our open house, in our online map tool, took our survey. You can see lots of responses that we've been able to process and develop recommendations around. We were able to visit with 7 RNOs over the course of the first half of 2024 to have deeper conversations with those groups about these corridors. And the concerns that came out of those groups, the top concerns, generally centered around concerns when walking along or across these corridors, and how that relates to infrastructure for pedestrians. Sight distance, which is ability to see down these streets and judge when it's safe to enter or cross them. And then the width of the streets, as well as the speed of the streets, and sort of the relationship between those two concerns. So when we look at the data and we look at the concerns that were documented through the comments that we received from community members, what we found is that the concerns really boil down to the 6 categories that you see here. The first is sort of an underlying concern that exists across all these corridors and exacerbates other crash issues, which is that speeds are high on these streets, which I pointed out earlier in some of the data that we've got. The specific crashes that can be further exacerbated by speeds include broadside crashes at signalized intersections. These are often related to red light running on these corridors. Broadside crashes at unsignalized locations. So these would be locations with stop signs on the north-south streets, where drivers find it difficult or unsafe to be able to enter the street because they can't see far enough down the street. Crashes involving people walking or people biking. Overtaking turn crashes. So these are crashes where a vehicle turns from the wrong lane and crashes into a vehicle headed straight in the lane that they're in. And then head-on crashes, which obviously result from people driving the wrong way. Next slide. So for each of these concerns, we have developed recommendations for different treatments that can be done to address the concerns, and also taken a real effort to try to focus what we can do on low-cost treatments that Dottie can do soon, and that will have a significant effect on reducing crashes. So when it comes to that first concern of speed, we are recommending a retiming of the corridor that will assume a lower operating speed so that platoons of vehicles naturally travel at a lower speed, as well as treatments to physically narrow the roadway through expanded use of bulb outs, like some have already been done on these corridors, but doing those on a more widespread basis to narrow the corridor visually and encourage vehicles to travel slower. That second crash type of broadside crashes at unsignalized intersections, signal timing can address those as well through adjustments to things like the yellow time and the red time at the intersection. Broadside crashes at unsignalized intersections, the recommendation is to extend some of the no parking zones on the east-west avenues to increase sight distance and make it easier for people to see further down the street before they enter. Pedestrian and bicyclist crashes, things like leaving pedestrian intervals at the signals, which will allow pedestrians to enter the street before vehicles, and then bulb outs to physically shorten the crossing distance will help with that. Overtaking turn crashes, actually putting the painted arrows or the lane legends to clarify what lanes turns are allowed from will help with that. And then for head-on crashes, adding improved one-way signage so that it's more clear to people what direction of travel to go and not to travel the wrong way. DOTI's intention is to implement many of these treatments alongside the construction of BRT. Many of these are low cost and can be done internally with DOTI crews or through what's called a DOTI work order. So these are the things that we're hoping to see soonest on these corridors. Next slide. I do want to touch briefly on other higher cost treatments and treatments under assessment that we're considering. Different technologies to help further mitigate red light running crashes, doing our construction with more permanent materials rather than the quick build materials, which comes at a higher cost, but we've heard from neighborhoods are preferred from an aesthetic standpoint, as well as improving pedestrian crossings. We're also assessing different treatments that we think would be have an even greater crash and speed reduction effect than the short-term and low-cost things that we can do. Things like realignment of the street within the right-of-way, or vertical traffic calming like speed humps, red light cameras, reducing the number of travel lanes, possibly converting segments of these streets to two ways, long-term consideration for a bikeway, and different neighborhood traffic calming on local streets. Each of these require a greater deal of feasibility assessment than we've been able to do thus far, and are something that is going to continue to happen alongside BRT construction, the assessment that is. So I'll close out this section on the last slide here, just to mention that our next steps, we do plan to publish our summary report later this summer. As I mentioned, begin implementation of those low-cost treatments alongside construction of BRT. Complete that assessment of those higher costs and higher efficacy treatments, and also pursue funding for those. The implementation timeline and the specific yes or no decisions on that are still up in the air, but those are things that are going to be continued to be explored in the months and years to come, as we really try to do as much as we can to improve the safety on these corridors and achieve the Vision Zero goal, both in Denver and on these corridors parallel to East Colfax.
Appreciate that, Charlie, as do many community members, I'm guessing, based on the number of reactions that we're seeing. So thanks for taking us through that. Just a couple of reminders, we're going to keep plugging along. There's more content to get through, just a couple of quick things. So one is, I am noting that some people are raising their hands. We are not ignoring you. We will not be sort of addressing questions in that format, but ask rather that you put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to address those when we get to the Q&A portion. I also noted that there were quite a few questions around the parking. We would recommend that you go to the website that Nick shared to take a look at the recommendations, which are block by block recommendations, and share any specific questions that you have via the email that Nick shared. And we'll continue to put that in the chat so that you all have access to that. So with that, let me introduce Marcy Loughran, who's going to take you through sort of the updated construction messaging and plan. Marcy. Marcy, you may be muted, perhaps.
Muted figures something, right?
Oh, yeah.
Great. Again, Marcy Loughran, providing, supporting the team with construction communications and outreach. Next slide, please. So tonight I'll be providing an update on our construction efforts. Looking at the slide here, we anticipate 5 segments to construction. We'll be working west to east, which are segments 1 through 5 here. You may also notice that some of these segments overlap. We're not completing just one segment and then moving on to segment 2 and so on and so on. These are really logistics that are largely based on our trade partners, scopes of work, efficiencies with the work planned, existing conditions, material availability, and things like that. The way these segments are structured also provide flexibility during construction and allow us to maintain that forward progress. Next slide. So here we're showing the phasing of the work anticipated in each of the segments that was on the first slide, with particular focus on station construction and full depth pavement reconstruction. We're showing that really because it's a larger work area, so that's why you're going to see more cones and more construction barriers, etc. There are other activities happening, of course, but the station construction is really the driver for how we plan the work in the work areas. So looking here at phase 1, we'll reduce traffic to 1 general purpose lane in each direction. We'll shift the eastbound traffic and the westbound traffic to through traffic to the north. Then we will construct the eastbound platforms along the segment. We'll also, during this work, we'll also work on roadway improvements such as curb ramps, extensions, drainage systems, and other pavement reconstructions. Now, when you move to phase 2, now we flip sides. As you can see, we shift the traffic, the eastbound traffic, to construct the westbound station platforms along this, similar roadway pattern from phase 1. Some of the protections for the new stations may also still be needed to protect the construction from the previous phases. So you might still see some of those construction barriers and things along the corridor. Then once we move over to phase 3, we're really constructing all the remaining amenities to the stations, such as the ticket vending machines, the platform finishes, benches, probably the public art will come in this phase as well. And then we'll perform the roadway finishes and then the commissioning of the stations and testing. And then finally, also you'll see here is the general purpose lanes are in their final location on the sides of the platforms. Let me also note that not all these segments will look exactly like what I just explained. There are some efficiencies in the future segments due to some of the larger work areas and wider roadways. For example, when we get to segment 3 in Colorado Boulevard, it's a little bit wider. So we might be able to have some efficiencies with some of the stations and some of the construction planned in those areas. Those are things that we will definitely outline and communicate those as we get closer to those phases of work. But in general, for phases 1 and 2, for segments 1 and 2, the phases will look very similar to what we see below. Now, if you go to the next slide. So our team continues to plan and prepare for construction. Our mobilization efforts will look similar in each segment. Looking at segment 1, which is from Broadway to Williams, we'll see the following activities as we get ramped up. Let me also walk you through a little bit of the visual that you see here. This is a sample construction map that we're working with right now, and this will be part of a construction information flyer that we anticipate sending out for each of the segments in each of the areas. So as you see, this little snapshot here isn't entirely all of segment 1. This is a very long corridor, so it's hard to show all of the map in one piece. So we've taken it in chunks and are looking at ways to communicate where the bus stops, where they were, or where the temporary stops, where the closed stops, where you see some construction and bus pullouts. There might be some construction on some of those neighboring streets, etc. So we're looking at a streamlined way to be able to communicate chunks of these segments out to those of you who are interested in those particular segments. And we'll do that along the corridor. We also anticipate kind of breaking down some of these as we start to talk about some of the sidewalk work and the tree soil cells and things like that, just to give folks a little bit clearer idea of what's going to be happening in one particular area. So some of the early construction activities that we're going to be looking at are the site investigations. You often hear that called potholing, but that is when you go into a specific area of the street and they kind of dig down and see what's down there. So really just investigations of when we break into the to that asphalt, what are we going to see under there? What are we going to find? So that will start to happen along the corridor as part of an early activity. You like to know what we'll run into before we get there. We'll also start installing the signage and barriers and wayfinding. So a lot of the lane configurations will get moved over here where you see the green, and then you'll see where the red is now. You'll start to see those construction barriers to really delineate the construction work areas from any of the general public. You'll also start to notice limited on-street parking as we start to get to work in some of these areas. As always, I like to probably talk about these at every meeting, those construction protocols that we want to adhere to along the entire corridor. And at all times during construction really is maintaining the access to all businesses throughout construction. Colfax is open, businesses will have access. We'll maintain one lane of traffic in each direction. We'll also have defined delivery and haul routes. So making sure that any of those construction deliveries know exactly where to go and where to drop off those materials, so they're not winding through the streets and riding through any of the neighborhoods. So that will be important. Also, the trade partner parking policies. I'm really having trouble with my words here this evening, but those parking policies will be identified in all of their trade partner contracts. They'll have dedicated parking areas, so they won't be parking on the side streets or taking any of the metered spots or anything. We will have dedicated parking areas for those folks, and then we will probably bus them to their work zone and their job site. RTD will also be maintaining the 15 and 15L service with temporary stops as needed. As soon as we get that information, we're able to pop that on these maps, and then we'll also have some links to RTD and other resources through RTD from our website, and then there will be information on RTD's website as well and through their apps. If you go to the next slide. And then really construction outreach and what you can expect from us. Hopefully you're going to hear a lot from us. We're going to be sending you direct mails, e-blasts. So we definitely encourage you to please sign up for those construction updates. Right here's the QR code, and it's also on the website, the sign up sheet, which is denvergov.org/Colfax BRT. It's a nice truncated web address, so you can get there, but we'll be also sending, emailing, and hand delivering construction flyers and printed notices. We'll start to push those out probably about a month before we start construction. We want to really do a nice ramp up to when we get started, so everybody's on the same page, no surprises, and kind of what's happening and when. And then we'll also continue to utilize these community forums like this one, the Chats on Colfax, and any other one-on-one meetings. And then there's also the inquiry form. I think many of you use that. That's on the website. And then when we start construction, this hotline will be active, so you'll be able to call in with any kind of questions and concerns, and we will get back to you and try to just keep open and constant communication with you as we move into construction. I think that's good.
Yep, appreciate that, Marcy. So hopefully that gives all of you sort of a clarity around what to expect and how to engage with the construction communications team. And so Marcy mentioned businesses. And so last but not least, I want to introduce Ryan Lewis, who's going to be talking about our small business outreach resources and approach. So Ryan.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Abby. Well, we're doing a lot, trying to build more resources, as many as we can, for the businesses on Colfax. And in addition to creating a series of tools for businesses on Colfax, and I'm going to speak about those in just a minute, we're setting up regular programming that brings businesses together, discusses concerns, and articulates solutions. Our goal is to make each very, very relevant to your experiences. So, for example, we hosted a forum about financial resiliency during construction in June, and that recording plus other video resources are available on our website. Next Tuesday from 2:30 to 4 at Fanatic on Colfax, just west of Grant, we're hosting our first of many chats on Colfax events. And the goal of that is to create a space where businesses can enjoy light refreshments and discuss themed topics with experts and each other. So for each, we'll welcome businesses feeling the heat of construction. So for the first one, we're hoping folks from Broadway to Williams will join us, and you can see the registration QR code here on this slide. At that event, we'll do a deeper dive into those available resources like grants and have discussions about business plans, financial forecasting, and how attitudes can affect revenue. We'll look at case studies that will be helpful examples for how to thrive during construction. The next one is going to be at the end of August, and as construction moves down the corridor, so will our events. So each one will be at a local business. So if you're interested in hosting one, let the project team know. Okay, so now let's go into some of those specific resources I mentioned. They're on the next slide. Okay, so the website is really your one-stop business support shop. And you can follow the QR code here that we've been posting directly to our small business webpage on the Colfax BRT site. In addition to the recordings that I just mentioned, we have a toolkit that includes information about what to expect and suggestions about how to overcome some of the main issues businesses tend to confront when construction comes to your doorstep. Everything from how to manage alternative routes, innovative marketing ideas, and ways to turn construction workers into customers. Another important resource is the business self-assessment. There's one for folks in Denver and one for Aurora. This is designed to help you think through how a business may be impacted by construction and the best ways to prepare. Our friends at Dito are on hand to follow up with anyone who could use a little bit of extra help, things like referrals to various business supports and technical assistance. So be sure to submit those when you're ready. And segue, now to talk through available grants, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Greek from Dito.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to announce that the City and County of Denver will offer a grant program to support businesses whose revenue may be impacted by this construction project. Because the program is targeted to Denver's smallest neighborhood-serving businesses, eligibility will be restricted to businesses earning annual gross revenue between $30,000 and $5 million. They must be brick and mortar businesses operating on East Colfax Avenue between Broadway and Yosemite. And a business must demonstrate 20% or greater revenue loss comparing pre-construction revenue with during construction revenue. And there are other eligibility requirements that will be detailed at the upcoming financial forums, the chats on Colfax. And we also will have information sessions that will be offered virtually at all different times of the day, because we understand that businesses wear many hats and they're in their business during the day, and in the evening, maybe the time when they have to attend an information session. But we will have assistance for businesses to complete their applications. The grant amount is $7,500 for businesses earning less than $100,000 and $15,000 for businesses earning greater than $100,000. It is a one-time grant. Now, if construction proceeds as anticipated with the first segment starting in October of this year, we anticipate that we will invite eligible businesses that have been impacted, their business revenue, to apply in early 2025. So I look forward to the opportunity to assist your businesses while this project takes place, and offer the celebration when the project is done, because it will look great.
Great. Appreciate that, Joanne. I want to just take a moment to appreciate all the presenters tonight for sharing updates on the project. And I also wanted to appreciate all of you who have joined the webinar to sort of listen, and hopefully you're feeling up to date on where we are with the project. We do have a couple of minutes to answer some of the questions that have been submitted to Q&A. Before I turn it over to Emma Harrison, let me just remind everybody that the resources, many of which were discussed this evening, are on our project website. It is here. If you can't see it, again, we'll put it in the chat. And we will also be posting the recording and the slides from this webinar to the project website. So if this evening was not a time for you just to sort of listen and be present, then you can take the opportunity at a later date. With that, I'll turn it over to Emma to answer a couple of questions before we'll wrap close to the half hour.
Thanks, Abby, and thank you everyone for your engagement this evening. There are a few themes in the Q&A that I will raise, and I just want to reiterate too, a lot of great questions, specific location-based questions on the safety study and parking. And I would encourage you to direct those questions to the parking and camp email address, and we can get back to you with those specific location-based questions. Monica Martinez, thanks for joining from the FEX Partnership. Monica had a question around construction timeline, specifically around the end date of construction. When will construction end, and when will we be in operation with the BRT? So, John, I believe that might be a you question.
Happy to answer that, Emma. Absolutely. And thanks for your question, Monica. So yeah, we do expect construction to start wrapping up at the end of 2027. I think I did see something that was asking maybe it was supposed to finish earlier, but we've basically spent a little more time making sure that the design is good and that we're happy with that, and making just dotting I's and crossing T's and working closely with FTA. So we're actually starting construction a little later than we had hoped, say 2 years ago. We had hoped that we might start construction a little earlier, but that's obviously not happening. So we're going to be starting construction this fall. Yeah, so it's going to wrap up in Q4 of 2027.
Thanks, John. Related question on funding for the project. Where are we getting our funding for building of the BRT? Is it coming from the Elevate Bond Program or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting approximately $70 million from the Elevate Denver bond. And then we're getting another approximately 30 million from other sources within the state, both from the state of Colorado and from the city of Aurora. And then we're getting 128 million is what we expect to be receiving from the Federal Transit Administration. So about half of the funding is coming from federal sources via the Federal Transit Administration.
John. I know we are at 6:30 now. I believe we will take a few more questions here, but understand if people need to drop off to enjoy their evening. So thanks for joining us. One question, there are a few around RTD operations and RTD enhancements at stations, so I do want to hit on that. First is the enhanced fare system. Julian Sanchez asked, since the BRT is going to be similar to light rail with boarding processes, how will we prevent kind of free riding at the platforms?
Yeah, I can chime in here and say that I know RTD is still working through approach to that topic. I think it's a challenging one. We've met with them several times to discuss options, and luckily they have some time until the BRT's operational to figure out approach.
Great. Thanks, James. Regarding the safety study, Charlie, I'll direct this at you. A question around how we accounted for future conditions, if at all, knowing that traffic patterns will change once the BRT is implemented, and how that went into the data inputs for our study.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the number of crashes that happens at a location tends to trend with the number of vehicles or number of users at that location. So as those numbers go up, the number of users, the crashes tend to go up as well. On a corridor like this, where frankly there is a history of crashes and we're able to deduce fairly straightforward trends as to what's causing those crashes and what the issues are, and those issues have existed on these corridors for a long time. Our expectation is that mitigating existing locations that have existing issues will also serve to prevent future crashes as traffic patterns in the area change. But we are also thinking about how certain countermeasures may be prioritized at certain locations on the corridor, or on the corridors rather, potentially where access on Colfax is changing, that might cause traffic in the neighborhoods to move around a little bit, so that those streets where access on Colfax is changed are getting some level of treatment in a proactive manner.
Emma, I want to thank you for just pulling out some of the themes from the Q&A, and for all of you for submitting your questions in Q&A. Obviously, we're not going to be able to answer all of them this evening, but again, I would direct you to the resources on the website, and I would also ask that you share those questions and submit them via the web form on the website. We do monitor and respond to those questions actively and consistently. So with that, we want to be respectful of everybody's time, and thank you all for joining in this evening. Wish you a nice evening and look forward to your continued engagement in the project. Thanks all. Bye-bye.